There is a moment in some marriages that no one talks about. No shouting, no dramatic betrayal, no slammed doors, just a quiet shift inside one person where something essential goes still. They are still there, sharing meals, sharing a bed, sharing years. But inwardly, they have already begun to leave. If you've ever sensed distance without explanation, or felt yourself slowly preparing for a life you haven't yet admitted you want, this moment is not random. It is psychological, it is human, and it changes everything. Most divorces do not begin with anger. They begin with silence, with unanswered questions that stop being asked, with emotions that are carefully folded away so daily life can continue uninterrupted. The person who prepares quietly is not cold, selfish, or deceptive. They are often the one who stayed the longest, tried the hardest, and hoped the deepest. What you are witnessing is not impulsive escape, but a slow internal reckoning between loyalty and truth. In the hidden chambers of the mind, a profound transformation is unfolding. Love is being examined without illusion. Responsibility is being weighed against self-erasure. Memory and grief intertwine as the psyche searches for a way to survive without betraying itself. This inner process is invisible, yet it is one of the most psychologically intense passages a human being can endure. Because when someone quietly prepares for divorce, they are not just deciding to leave a relationship, they are deciding whether they are allowed to exist fully in their own life. When people imagine divorce, they often picture arguments, slammed doors, raised voices, or sudden revelations. Yet one of the most psychologically complex forms of separation happens quietly, almost invisibly, long before any papers are signed or words are spoken. The psychology of people who quietly prepare for divorce is not rooted in impulsivity, but in long internal negotiations. These individuals do not wake up one morning and decide to leave. They slowly detach inwardly while remaining outwardly present, carrying on routines, conversations, and shared responsibilities as if nothing has changed, while something profound is already reorganizing itself deep within the psyche. In depth psychology, there is an understanding that major life transitions begin in the unconscious long before they reach conscious articulation. The marriage may still exist in form, but inwardly an image has begun to fade. An inner symbol of us no longer holds emotional charge. What replaces it at first is not certainty, but a quiet unease, a sense that the relationship no longer reflects the person one has become. This unease is often difficult to name because it is not always accompanied by obvious conflict. In fact, many quietly preparing for divorce describe their marriage as fine or functional, yet something essential feels missing. This inner dissonance creates psychological tension. Human beings have a deep need for coherence between their inner truth and outer life. When that coherence breaks down, the psyche seeks resolution. For some, this manifests as open confrontation. For others, particularly those who learned early in life that conflict is dangerous or futile, resolution takes the form of silent preparation. They begin to imagine life beyond the marriage, not as fantasy, but as necessity. This imagining is not dramatic, it is practical, methodical, and emotionally restrained. One recurring pattern described in analytical writings is the withdrawal of libido, not in the narrow sexual sense, but as psychic energy. The person still shows up physically, but their emotional investment quietly diminishes. They stop bringing their inner world into the relationship. Thoughts, dreams, frustrations, and insights are processed alone rather than shared. This is not indifference, it is self-protection. The psyche is conserving energy for a transition it has already begun to anticipate. From a psychological perspective, this withdrawal often follows years of adaptation. Many who quietly prepare for divorce are not avoidant by nature. They are exhausted by repeated attempts to be understood. Relationship researchers have noted that when bids for connection are consistently missed or dismissed, individuals eventually stop making them. Silence then replaces dialogue, not because there is nothing to say, but because saying it no longer feels meaningful. In early stages, the individual may not consciously think, "I am preparing for divorce." Instead, they feel an urge to strengthen autonomy. They become more financially aware, more emotionally self-reliant, more private. They may begin therapy alone, read books on identity or boundaries, or reconnect with parts of themselves that were set aside. These behaviors are often framed as self-improvement, but at a deeper level they are acts of psychic differentiation, the process of reclaiming a self that has been submerged in the marital role. Depth psychology has long emphasized the danger of over-identification with roles. When a person's identity becomes too tightly bound to being a spouse, the psyche eventually rebels, not loudly but persistently. Quiet divorce preparation is often the psyche's attempt to restore balance. The individual is not necessarily rejecting their partner. They are responding to an inner demand to become more whole. There is also a shadow dimension to this process. The shadow, in psychological terms, contains parts of the self that were disowned to maintain harmony, morality, or approval. In many long-term marriages, individuals suppress anger, desire, ambition, or independence to keep peace. Over time, these disowned parts accumulate energy. When they finally push toward consciousness, they do so with urgency. The quiet preparation for divorce is often accompanied by a growing awareness of resentment, not explosive resentment, but a heavy, clarifying one. It arrives with the realization that too much of the self has been sacrificed. Spiritually, this stage can feel like an inner calling rather than a decision. Many describe it as a sense of no longer being aligned with their own life. Across spiritual traditions, there is a recurring theme: when the soul is ignored too long, it speaks through discomfort. Psychology mirrors this insight by observing that depression, numbness, or chronic dissatisfaction often emerge when a person lives inauthentically. Quiet divorce preparation is sometimes less about leaving a partner and more about leaving a false self. Those who prepare silently are often highly conscientious. They do not want to harm, shock, or destabilize others unnecessarily. Family systems psychology helps explain this. Individuals who grew up in emotionally fragile environments often become attuned to maintaining stability. They learn to carry tension internally rather than expressing it externally. In marriage, this pattern can persist. They take responsibility not only for their own emotions, but for their partner's equilibrium as well. Silence becomes a form of caretaking, yet silence has a cost. As emotional distance grows, the marriage becomes more symbolic than lived. Rituals continue, but intimacy fades. Conversations stay practical. Conflict is avoided not because things are resolved, but because resolution feels impossible. The psyche begins to imagine separation as relief rather than loss. This is a critical psychological shift. When relief outweighs grief in the imagination, the inner decision is already well underway. Another key element is the development of an inner witness. Quiet preparers often observe their marriage from a distance, almost as if studying it. They notice patterns without trying to change them. This observational stance is common in depth-oriented therapy and reflective practices. It allows clarity to emerge without emotional flooding. However, when his stance is applied to a marriage without mutual awareness, it creates asymmetry. One partner is still inside the relationship, the other is already halfway outside. psychologically speaking. Attachment theory offers further insight. Individuals with anxious attachment often protest loudly when dissatisfied. Those with avoidant or dismissive tendencies withdraw. Quiet divorce preparation can occur in both, but for different reasons. In avoidant individuals, it may be a continuation of emotional distancing. In anxious or secure individuals, it is more often the result of learned hopelessness. After repeated attempts to repair, the psyche stops investing. There is also a moral struggle embedded in this process. Many people quietly preparing for divorce wrestle with guilt. They may feel disloyal for having thoughts of leaving before speaking them. Religious or cultural values can intensify this conflict, framing endurance as virtue. Psychology does not dismiss these values, but recognizes the toll they can take when they silence authentic suffering. The inner dialogue becomes complex: responsibility versus truth, commitment versus vitality. Spiritual psychology often describes this stage as a dark night, not necessarily dramatic, but deeply introspective. The individual feels alone even when accompanied. They may grieve silently, mourning not only the relationship, but the version of themselves who once believed it could work. Grief precedes separation here, not follows it. By the time the divorce is spoken aloud, much of the mourning has already occurred internally. One striking feature of quiet preparation is practicality. These individuals think in terms of logistics: finances, housing, children, work schedules. This practicality is sometimes misinterpreted as coldness, but psychologically it is a grounding strategy. When emotions are overwhelming, the mind turns to structure. Structure creates a sense of safety in the face of existential change. Children, if present, occupy a central psychological space. Many parents remain in silent preparation for years, waiting for a right time that may never come. Family psychology notes that while parents often believe they are protecting children by staying silent, children are highly sensitive to emotional undercurrents. They feel the distance, even when it is unspoken. This realization can either accelerate or delay the final decision, depending on the individual's beliefs and fears. There is also the phenomenon of emotional replacement. Quiet preparers may not engage in affairs, but they often redirect emotional energy elsewhere, into work, creativity, friendships, or inner life. This redirection is not always conscious. It serves to meet psychological needs that the marriage no longer fulfills. Over time, the contrast becomes stark. Life outside the marriage feels alive. Life inside feels constricted. From a depth perspective, this is the psyche rehearsing separation. Imagination is a powerful tool. Studies in psychology show that mental simulation reduces fear by increasing familiarity. By imagining life alone, the individual slowly weakens the terror associated with leaving. What once felt impossible becomes conceivable. Conceivability is the precursor to action. It is important to understand that quiet preparation does not mean lack of love. Many still care deeply for their spouse. Care is no longer enough to sustain intimacy. Love without mutual recognition becomes a burden. Philosophical psychologists have written that love requires not only affection, but the freedom to become oneself. When a relationship constrains becoming, love begins to suffocate. As this inner process deepens, the individual may experience moments of surprising calm. This calm is often mistaken for certainty. In reality, it is the nervous system stabilizing around a new internal orientation. Anxiety spikes when the psyche is divided. Calm emerges when an inner decision begins to consolidate, even if it has not yet been consciously acknowledged. The final stages of quiet preparation are marked by emotional detachment paired with ethical concern. The individual thinks carefully about timing, language, and impact. They may delay the conversation not out of cowardice, but out of a desire to minimize harm. Psychology recognizes this as empathic attunement, though it can slide into self-erasure if prolonged too long. At the deepest level, this entire process reflects a universal psychological truth: human beings cannot indefinitely live in contradiction to their inner reality. Whether through crisis or quiet preparation, the psyche moves toward alignment. Divorce, in this sense, is not merely a legal or relational act. It is a psychological reorganization. It marks the end of one identity and the uncertain emergence of another. Yet even as the inner separation solidifies, doubt remains. Doubt is not weakness here, it is humanity. The psyche does not close doors lightly. Memories resurface. Moments of tenderness complicate resolve. The individual may oscillate between resolve and nostalgia. This oscillation is part of integration, not failure. And so the quiet work continues beneath the surface of ordinary life. Shared meals, shared beds, shared calendars coexist with an inner departure already in motion. The psyche is preparing, not rushing, not dramatizing, but steadily rearranging loyalties, meanings, and self-understanding. The outer marriage still stands, but inwardly, something has shifted beyond reversal, even if it has not yet found words, even if it has not yet crossed into action, because the process is not finished speaking, not finished revealing what it demands, and the story has not yet reached the moment where the inner truth must step fully into the light, because stepping fully into the light is rarely a single moment of courage, but a gradual erosion of denial. Quiet preparation is the psyche's way of telling the truth slowly, in increments the nervous system can tolerate. When people finally speak the words aloud, it often surprises others how sudden it seems, yet, for the one leaving, the decision feels old, almost settled by time itself. Psychology recognizes this phenomenon as temporal asymmetry in relational endings. One partner experiences the rupture as abrupt, the other as long overdue. Inside the one preparing, there is often a private reckoning with responsibility not only to vows, family, or children, but to the self that has been neglected. In depth-oriented writings, there is a recurring idea that what we fail to live consciously returns as fate. When individuals suppress their inner truth for too long, life arranges circumstances that force confrontation. Quiet divorce preparation can be seen as an attempt to meet that confrontation voluntarily rather than through breakdown or crisis. There is also the gradual dismantling of hope. Not dramatic hope, but the subtle kind that lives in expectations of change. At some point, the person realizes that they are no longer waiting for their partner to become different. This realization is psychologically decisive. Hope, once relinquished, frees energy. That energy then turns toward planning, imagining, and preparing. The relationship stops being a project and becomes a chapter nearing completion. In many cases, the person has already grieved multiple times within the marriage, grieved unmet conversations, grieved emotional absences, grieved versions of the relationship that never materialized. Grief theory notes that when grief is prolonged and unresolved, it often shifts from acute pain to numb clarity. This clarity is not cruel. It is protective. It allows the individual to function while carrying loss. Quiet preparation also involves an inner moral inventory. The individual reviews their own contributions to the marital decline. This self-examination can be harsh. Those who prepare silently are often self-critical, questioning whether they tried hard enough, communicated clearly enough, sacrificed enough. Psychology recognizes this as an internalized superego dialogue, an inner judge weighing duty against desire. Resolution does not come from winning this argument, but from realizing that self-sacrifice without reciprocity eventually becomes self-betrayal. There is a spiritual loneliness that accompanies this stage. Even when surrounded by people, the individual feels unseen in their deepest struggle because it has not yet been named. Silence isolates, yet silence also deepens introspection. Many report a heightened inner life during this time, vivid dreams, sudden insights, moments of existential clarity. The psyche, no longer investing in external repair, turns inward. One of the most painful aspects of quiet preparation is the performance of normalcy. Continuing to play the role of spouse while inwardly disengaged creates cognitive and emotional dissonance. Over time, this dissonance can manifest as fatigue, irritability, or somatic symptoms. Psychosomatic research has long shown that unexpressed conflict often finds expression in the body. The body carries what the mouth cannot yet say. There is also a subtle shift in perception. The individual begins to see their partner more clearly, without the haze of hope or idealization. This clarity is not necessarily judgmental. It is often marked by a sober acceptance of limitations, both theirs and the partner's. Acceptance, however, does not equal consent. One can accept who another is and still recognize that the relationship no longer supports one's becoming. In relational psychology, this moment is sometimes described as differentiation completed too late. Differentiation, the ability to maintain one's sense of self within closeness, should ideally occur within the relationship. When it does not, it may occur through leaving. Quiet preparers often realize that they changed in ways the relationship could not accommodate. Growth becomes incompatible with the existing structure. Spiritually, this can feel like a betrayal of the past self. The person wonders how they became someone capable of leaving what they once fought to preserve. Yet spiritual traditions often remind us that growth involves outgrowing. Fidelity to life sometimes requires infidelity to old forms. This is a painful truth, but one that psychology increasingly acknowledges. Staying true to a former identity at the cost of present authenticity leads to inner fracture. As the inner separation solidifies, emotional responses to the partner change. Annoyances become neutral. Conflicts lose charge. This emotional flattening is not apathy, it is disengagement. Attachment research shows that when emotional investment drops, physiological arousal drops with it. The nervous system prepares for separation by lowering emotional stakes. There may also be moments of tenderness that feel confusing. A shared laugh, a memory, a familiar gesture can stir affection. These moments do not invalidate the decision, they complicate it. Human bonds do not dissolve cleanly. Psychology cautions against interpreting transient warmth as proof that the relationship can be revived. Emotional memory lingers even when relational viability has ended. Another layer involves identity reconstruction. Quiet preparation often includes imagining oneself not as we but as I. This shift is profound. Language changes internally before it changes externally. Thoughts begin to organize around individual goals, values, and rhythms. The person starts to ask questions they may not have asked in years. What do I want my days to feel like? What kind of life am I willing to live? Existential psychology emphasizes that such questions arise most urgently at points of transition. Divorce, even before it happens, confronts individuals with freedom and responsibility. Freedom to choose differently, and responsibility for the consequences of that choice. This duality creates anxiety but also vitality. Anxiety here is not pathology, it is a signal of aliveness. Quiet preparers often seek mirrors that reflect their emerging self. They gravitate toward people, ideas, and environments that resonate with who they are becoming. This can be misinterpreted by partners as withdrawal or secrecy. Psychologically, it is alignment. The psyche seeks coherence by surrounding itself with confirming reflections. There is also the fear of becoming the villain. Many who prepare silently worry about being perceived as cold, selfish, or deceptive. This fear can prolong silence. Moral identity plays a powerful role in human behavior. Psychology shows that people often endure personal suffering to protect their self-concept as good, yet avoiding harm at all costs can paradoxically create more harm through prolonged ambiguity. Children again loom large in this stage. Parents may oscillate between leaving for their own sanity and staying for perceived stability. Developmental psychology suggests that children benefit more from emotionally healthy caregivers than from intact but emotionally dead relationships. Yet knowing this intellectually does not dissolve guilt. Guilt becomes part of the psychological landscape, shaping timing and communication. There is also the legal and social reality of divorce, which adds another layer of apprehension. The individual imagines social reactions, family judgments, financial consequences. These imagined futures are rehearsed internally, sometimes repeatedly. Cognitive psychology refers to this as prospective simulation. While it can increase anxiety, it also prepares the individual to act. As the inner decision matures, there is often a moment when the individual realizes they are no longer trying to fix the marriage, even internally. This realization can be sobering. It marks a point of no return psychologically, even if externally nothing has changed. The psyche has withdrawn its mandate for repair. At this stage, the person may become unusually calm in the face of conflict. Arguments no longer escalate because the emotional stake is gone. This calm can be deeply unsettling to the partner, who may sense distance without understanding its source. Silence becomes louder than words. In some cases, the partner begins to change precisely when the preparer has emotionally left. This timing is tragically common. Psychology explains it as a response to threat. When loss becomes imminent, motivation spikes. For the one preparing, these changes can feel too late. Trust in sustained change has eroded. The psyche has already reorganized around departure. This moment introduces profound ambivalence. Compassion collides with resolve. The individual may feel torn between empathy for their partner's pain and loyalty to their own truth. Holding both without collapsing into guilt or cruelty is one of the hardest psychological tasks in adult life. Spiritually, this can feel like standing between worlds. The old life is still present, the new one is not yet real. This liminal space is sacred and terrifying. Many traditions speak of thresholds as places of testing, where clarity is earned through endurance rather than certainty. As the final internal preparations near completion, the individual begins to imagine the conversation itself. Words are rehearsed, softened, revised. Psychology notes that difficult conversations are often scripted internally as a way to reduce anxiety. Yet no script survives the emotional reality of the moment. The psyche prepares anyway because preparation is a form of care. Even now, doubt flickers. The human mind is capable of holding opposing truths simultaneously. One can know a relationship must end and still wish it did not have to. This is not weakness, it is complexity. Mature psychology makes room for paradox. Throughout this process, something fundamental is happening. The individual is reclaiming authorship of their life narrative. Quietly, inwardly, they are shifting from a story of endurance to a story of agency. Agency does not guarantee happiness, but it restores dignity, and dignity is essential for psychological health. The outer marriage may still appear intact, but inwardly, loyalties have shifted. The primary allegiance is no longer to the relationship as it was, but to the self that has been silenced. This shift is irreversible once fully realized. One cannot unknow what has been seen, and so the quiet work continues, thought by thought, realization by realization, beneath shared routines and familiar walls. No announcements yet, no dramatic exits, only an inner alignment steadily forming. The psyche is gathering itself, preparing to cross from inner truth to outer action, even if it has not yet found the moment, the language, or the courage to do so, because the process is still unfolding, still negotiating fear and responsibility, still listening for the final inner permission that will allow what has long been known to finally be spoken aloud, and that inner permission rarely arrives as a thunderclap. More often it emerges as a quiet steadiness, a sense that the ground beneath the psyche has stopped shifting. The individual notices that the fear which once dominated their imagination has softened into something more manageable. Fear does not vanish, it loses authority. This is a subtle but decisive psychological shift. When fear no longer governs the inner world, action becomes possible. At this point, the person may begin to feel strangely present in moments that once felt dull or oppressive. Colors appear sharper, music lands deeper, solitude feels less like absence and more like space. These experiences are not random, they signal the psyche's reorientation toward vitality. Depth psychology has long observed that when a person stops living against their inner truth, libidinal energy, psychic energy, returns to consciousness. Life begins to flow again, yet this resurgence of aliveness can coexist with deep sorrow. Preparing for divorce quietly does not mean the absence of love. It often means the recognition that love alone is insufficient. This is one of the most painful insights in human psychology. Love does not automatically equal compatibility, safety, or growth. Accepting this truth dismantles many romantic myths internalized early in life. The individual may reflect on family patterns at this stage. Questions arise about what was learned about marriage, endurance, sacrifice, and silence. Transgenerational psychology suggests that unresolved patterns repeat until made conscious. Quiet preparation can therefore represent an attempt not only to end a marriage, but to interrupt a lineage of unspoken suffering. This awareness adds weight to the decision. It is no longer merely personal, it feels archetypal. Dream life often intensifies. Symbols of doors, journeys, floods, or abandoned houses may appear. In analytical psychology, dreams at times of transition reveal the psyche's attempt to guide consciousness toward integration. Even without interpreting them literally, the emotional tone of these dreams often points toward separation as a necessary movement rather than a failure. The person may also begin to notice a shift in how they relate to conflict. Instead of feeling consumed by it, they observe it with a kind of detachment. This detachment is not indifference, it is perspective. Cognitive psychology would describe this as decentering, the ability to observe thoughts and emotions without being overwhelmed by them. Decentering often precedes major life changes because it allows for choice rather than reaction. Quiet preparation also includes moments of grief for the partner as a fellow human being. Seeing the other's vulnerabilities more clearly can evoke compassion unburdened by obligation. The preparer may feel sorrow for the partner's wounds, limitations, or fears, even while knowing they cannot heal them. This compassion does not reverse the decision, it humanizes it. Social withdrawal sometimes increases during this phase, not because the individual is depressed, but because they are conserving energy. Psychological transitions require inward focus. Excessive social input can drown out the subtle signals of inner knowing. Silence becomes a form of listening. At the same time, there may be a heightened sensitivity to hypocrisy, both in oneself and others. The individual becomes acutely aware of the gap between appearance and reality. Living a double life, even temporarily, creates ethical tension. This tension can manifest as restlessness or impatience with superficial interactions. The psyche demands coherence. Financial and logistical planning often accelerates here. Practical steps feel grounding. They translate abstract intention into tangible readiness. From a psychological standpoint, this planning reduces uncertainty and increases perceived control, which lowers anxiety. Each small step affirms that the individual is capable of surviving what comes next. There is also an emerging sense of boundaries, sometimes for the first time. The individual begins to notice where they end and the partner begins. Emotional enmeshment loosens. Other people's moods feel less contagious. This boundary formation is essential for psychological adulthood, even though it often arrives late in long-term relationships. The spiritual dimension deepens as well. Many experience a reevaluation of meaning. They question whether their life, as currently structured, aligns with their values. This is not a rejection of commitment, but a redefinition of it. Commitment to what? To whom? To which version of the self? These questions are existential, not selfish. The individual may also confront shame. Shame for wanting more. Shame for changing. Shame for not being able to make it work. Shame is a powerful inhibitor of action. Psychology recognizes shame as a relational emotion. It arises in the imagined gaze of others. Quiet preparation often involves slowly dismantling this imagined jury and reclaiming the right to self-defini. Qian. As the inner narrative stabilizes, the person may find themselves speaking differently internally about the marriage. Language shifts from if to when, from we to I. These linguistic changes reflect cognitive reorganization. Thought patterns realign with the emerging decision. The body, too, responds. Some report better sleep, fewer headaches, or a general sense of relief as the decision clarifies. Others experience the opposite, tension, insomnia, or digestive issues as the weight of impending change presses closer to consciousness. Both responses are normal. The body processes truth in its own time. At this stage, moments of nostalgia can be particularly intense. Memory does not follow logic. It follows emotion. The psyche revisits earlier chapters of the relationship, often idealizing them. This is not denial, it is integration. Revisiting the past allows the individual to carry forward what was real and meaningful rather than dismissing the entire relationship as a mistake. Attachment theory helps explain why leaving can feel so destabilizing even when the decision is clear. Attachment bonds are wired deeply into the nervous system. Breaking them triggers primal fears of abandonment and isolation. Quiet preparation allows the nervous system to gradually adjust to this impending rupture, reducing shock. The individual may also notice a subtle impatience with themselves for not acting sooner. Regret surfaces, not only for lost time, but for self-betrayal. This regret can be corrosive if turned inward as blame. Healthier processing frames it as delayed wisdom rather than failure. Psychological maturity includes compassion for earlier versions of the self who did not yet know what is now clear. As the internal exit solidifies, moral clarity sharpens. The individual recognizes that prolonging the status quo may be more harmful than ending it. This realization reframes divorce not as destruction, but as a painful form of honesty. Honesty becomes the highest value, even when it hurts. There may be fleeting fantasies of escape without confrontation, of circumstances that force separation without choice. These fantasies reveal the human wish to avoid responsibility for causing pain. Psychology acknowledges this wish without endorsing it. Ultimately, agency requires ownership. The individual may begin to sense that staying would require shrinking. Shrinking desires, shrinking voice, shrinking spirit. This sense of contraction is a powerful motivator. Conversely, imagining life after divorce, though frightening, often carries an undertone of expansion. Expansion does not promise ease, it promises authenticity. Interpersonally, the preparer may become more attuned to subtle cues from the partner. Small gestures feel heavier, conversations more charged. The emotional atmosphere thickens. Even unspoken, the impending shift is often sensed by both parties. Humans are exquisitely sensitive to relational changes, even when they cannot articulate them. In some cases, the partner responds with increased closeness or anxiety. This can create confusion. The preparer may feel pulled back emotionally, even as their inner direction remains unchanged. Navigating this requires firmness without cruelty, a delicate psychological balance. There is also the question of timing. Quiet preparers often wait for a moment that feels right. Psychology suggests that no moment is ever entirely right. Readiness is internal, not circumstantial. Yet people wait for reduced stress, better finances, children reaching certain ages. These considerations are not excuses, they are attempts to mitigate harm. As time passes, the cost of waiting becomes clearer. Emotional numbness can deepen. Resentment may grow, not necessarily toward the partner, but toward oneself. This resentment signals that the psyche is nearing its limit. When inner limits are crossed, depression or sudden rupture can follow. The individual may increasingly imagine life beyond the marriage in concrete terms. Morning routines, evenings alone, shared custody schedules, new friendships. These images are not fantasies of escape, they are rehearsals for reality. The psyche practices living into the unknown. Spiritually, there may be a growing trust in life's unfolding. Trust not that things will be easy, but that they will be meaningful. This trust often replaces the need for certainty. One does not need to know exactly how things will turn out to know that staying is no longer an option. The quiet preparation phase is, in many ways, an initiation. Initiations are marked by separation, ordeal, and transformation. The separation has already begun inwardly. The ordeal is ongoing. The transformation is not yet visible, but it is underway. At moments, the individual may feel an unexpected gratitude for the relationship, for what it taught, for the love that was real even if it could not last. Gratitude does not negate grief. It coexists with it. Psychology recognizes that the ability to hold both is a sign of integration. As the internal work nears completion, there is often a sense of inevitability, not doom, but flow. The decision feels less like a choice and more like a recognition. This is when people say, "I just knew." Knowing here is not emotional impulse, it is accumulated understanding. Still, the final step has not been taken. Words have not yet crossed the threshold into the shared space. The psyche stands at the edge between inner truth and outer consequence. Everything inside is aligned, yet the world has not been informed. This tension hums quietly beneath daily life, and so the person continues, carrying both the weight of what is ending and the fragile promise of what has not yet begun, moving through ordinary moments with an extraordinary secret unfolding inside, listening carefully to their own breath, their own hesitation, their own courage, knowing that soon the silence will have to give way to speech, but not yet, because the inner story is still finishing the last lines it needs in order to be told. In the end, the quiet preparation for divorce is not an act of abandonment, but an act of reckoning. It is the moment when the psyche refuses to live divided any longer, when the inner voice that has been whispering for years finally demands to be honored. What ends is not merely a marriage, but a long season of self-denial. What begins is not freedom without cost, but truth with consequence. And truth, once fully seen, cannot be unseen without injury to the soul. This passage is not about choosing happiness over commitment, but about choosing integrity over illusion. It is about recognizing that a life lived in quiet resignation slowly erodes the self, while a life lived in conscious responsibility, however painful, restores dignity. Those who walk this path do not do so lightly. They carry grief, compassion, fear, and resolve all at once. They grieve what was real, release what cannot be saved, and step forward without guarantees, guided only by the deep inner knowing that remaining would mean disappearing. Psychologically and spiritually, this is a return to authorship. The individual accepts that meaning is not found in endurance alone, but in alignment between inner truth and outer life. The silence that once protected now transforms into speech. The fear that once ruled becomes a companion rather than a master. And while the future remains uncertain, one thing becomes clear beyond doubt: a life built on honesty, even when it breaks old forms, is the only foundation strong enough to carry what comes next.